AACEI-National Capital Section. My thanks to Scott, Morrison, and Shoshana, Daryl, Brooke, and Natalia. As soon as I requested all of you guys for this technical presentation, you immediately accepted it and step in and to make it happen today. Thank you so much. Now I will hand over this to Jill Hubbard, our Vice President. She will let you know the rules of this meeting and she will proceed from there. Thank you, Jill.
All right, thank you. All right, welcome everyone. We're going to ask for this presentation that during the presentation you mute yourself and you turn off your camera. I am going to hit mute all right now because we've had new people join since I've muted everyone. So speakers will have to unmute. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And we'll ask them at the end. At the end of the presentation, if you want to, we can have you unmute and actually ask the question, but we're going to let the presentation go through for continuity, and we'll ask all the questions at the end. If you're not familiar with Zoom, if you need to unmute, it's kind of hover your mouse to the bottom of the screen, and on the left is the mute and the video. You can turn one on and off. I like to, when watching it, if you go up to the upper right under view and pick side-by-side speaker, so you can see the slides and then a little view of whoever's talking at the time. Just nice to see that. And if you have, again, questions, put them in the chat. You can raise your hand later and I can chat just to you, and everybody enjoy.
All right, thank you very much, Jill. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to get us kicked off. My name is Scott Morrison. I'm an active member in our AACE local Bruce County branch up in Bruce County, Ontario, Canada. And today we're going to present to you something we call a Bruce Power success story. So this is reducing the time and cost of nuclear projects. And what you're going to see as part of this presentation is a real focus on our estimating process and really what we did as a company to work through that process, as well as some of the technical solutions that we had as a part of that. So today we've broken up our presentation to 5 speakers. So we've got Shoshana, Daryl, Brooke, and Natalia, and we've all done our piece. We've pulled this together. You'll have to give us a little bit of break. We did do a practice and a dry run, but if we're a little rough, please forgive us. But we're definitely looking forward to presenting and sharing our story, and looking forward to any questions that we can have to any of the folks on the session today. So I'm gonna pass the mic around, and I'm gonna get our presenters each to give a little bio of themselves, and then I'll give a bio of myself, and we'll get started. So Shoshana, why don't we start with you?
Right. Hello, everyone. My name is Shoshana Freisinger. I'm currently an advisor to the Bruce County local section because I currently hold an office as the VP Education on the AACE Board of Directors. I've also previously been treasurer for Region 1, and I'm participating in this particular presentation from the perspective of the independent estimate reviewer who came in and assessed the existing cost estimating process and provided recommendations for improvement based on observations. And so that will be the perspective that I'm presenting to you today in the course of this. Thanks, Scott.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. All right, Daryl.
Hey, everyone. So Daryl Zettler. I'm currently the program manager for estimating at Bruce Power, also a board member for the local Bruce County AAC chapter. My part of the story is I was part of the estimating team when we were using Excel. I was lucky enough to be part of the implementation crew of Cleopatra, and now driving the change to using a beautiful estimating software like Cleopatra. So when I'm not at work, you can find me outside with my 3 kids, usually playing some sort of sport, even in the cold Canadian winter.
Thanks, Daryl. Brooke.
Hey everyone, my name is Brooke. I'm currently a lead estimator for Williams Canada at the Bruce Power nuclear site. I have about 5 years of experience in both nuclear and mining, supporting greenfield and brownfield construction projects. I've been working with our estimating team on site using Cleopatra for about the last 3 years. And I'm actually starting my second year on our local AACE chapter with Scott, Daryl, and Shoshana.
Awesome. Thank you, Brooke. And Natalia.
Hey guys, I'm Natalia Urquiaga. So I'm the Vice President of Business for Cleopatra Enterprise within the US. So Canada, US, and even South America. So I'm your gal when it comes to Cleopatra as the tool itself. My part of the story here is just to tell you guys what in fact is Cleopatra and what we do. And very glad to have Bruce Power here as one of our clients, and but they're going to be doing most of the talk, so don't worry. I won't bore you guys.
Well, we'll try our best. Thank you, Natalia, for getting us involved with the discussion today. So when I was putting together my crib notes before I got started today, I know that when we looked at the attendance list, I know we have a few locals from our local chapter on today, so I was excited to see that. But just for those who might not know about Bruce Power, I'll give you a little rundown. So Bruce Power is located approximately 3 hours northwest of Toronto, Ontario, on the shores of Lake Huron. And we're actually the second largest nuclear power plant in the world. So there's two plants at our site comprising of 8 units, and we make up approximately 6,300 megawatts of electricity. And when you think about that, that's roughly 33% of the entire province of Ontario here in Canada. So we're really a pretty big player in the nuclear industry, not only in Canada but the world. So really what our success story here talks about is that we're in the midst of refurbishments of our units. So our 2 units were built in the late 60s into the early 70s for what we call Bruce A, and our second set of stations for Bruce B was built in the late 70s, early 80s. So we are at end of life on our units, and we're into what we would call a major refurbishment program for our units. And we're also doing other refurbishment work as well in different other programs and portfolios. So we have a very large project portfolio, and we spend a lot of dollars every year on capital projects. And as part of what we needed to be successful to execute those projects was we needed to really understand the cost and time it takes to do nuclear projects. And the way that our refurbishment schedule looks is that we're going to be keeping up with the volume of work that we are now right up until 2033, and we're looking to extend the life of our plants out into the 2060s. So significant amount of work, and it all starts with the right planning and understanding what the right cost is. So the story we're going to share with you today is as we got into our refurbishments, our estimating part of the story. So with that, I'll get you to flip to the next slide, Natalia. So what we're going to take you through today is I'm going to take you through the road to improvement. So really what the needs statement, and this goes back to 2015 in our what we called our estimated improvement plan. The second piece here that Shoshana talked about is the elements of improvement. So she was the person that came in and was really heavily involved when we worked together to look through what those improvements could be, and helped us as part of that implementation of what that was. The third piece of our journey was implementation and improvements, and this talks about process and tools. So between Natalia and Daryl, they're going to take us through that piece of the story. And then the fourth piece here is really our results. So how we're estimating today, and Brooke's going to walk you through that. So that'll be our presentation today. Next slide. All right, so just to open things up here, right now, Bruce Power leverages the Cleopatra tool to perform its estimating function. And we have other project controls tools for our other big sections. So for risk, we use Active Risk Manager, which I'm sure many are familiar with it there. For cost, we leverage EcoSys. And for scheduling, we leverage P6. So between those 3 tools and Cleopatra, that's our suite of tools that we use at Bruce Power for project controls. So our second bullet here is really that that was not always the case. Back when I joined the company in 2011, we were actually estimating using Excel spreadsheets, and we wanted to get ourselves on a path to get out of that. And for all of those good reasons, with respect to we have a number of replicate projects. We wanted to establish our own estimating database, establish our own nuclear Bruce Power knowledge base, and all of those things. And you simply can't do that inside of a Excel template or Excel spreadsheet. So that was just one of the many reasons, but that was really what set off our journey here as we started to look at improvements we could make within our processes. So for each of the tools that are used by the business, we've done a significant amount of work to look at the process. And what we found to be a successful is that if we're able to understand what our business process is for how we actually do our work and perform our work, we can then align that to an industry standard, ensure that we get the right tool for the right job. So as part of understanding what the best tools were for us to be successful at Bruce Power, it was for us to really understand what our process was and move on from there. So why we thought it was a good place to start with our estimating process was that this was at the front end of our process as we go from building an estimate to building project schedules to tracking project costs, identifying risks along the way, and then essentially closing that loop so that we can benchmark our estimates. We thought this was a perfect place to start. So we'll walk you through that process. Next step, Natalia. So again, we came up with a problem statement. So we wanted to make sure that we understood what we were trying to solve. So what our problem was is that as much as we were going through and continuing to do ongoing improvements, projects were perceived to have significant cost and/or schedule overruns. And I think that's a pretty standard statement in the nuclear industry. So we started with that up front and worked our way from there. The second bullet here talks about a common factor has been the lack of scope or comprehensive estimating basis during project initiation. And this is where we've really done a lot of work within our process piece. And some of the other speakers will talk a little bit about this as we get through it, but really that was a gap for us that we wanted to make sure that we identified in our problem statement. We also found that from a process perspective, we didn't have a consistent, rigorous approach to estimating, and that was not routinely applied in the history of Bruce Power. And then the last piece here that I talked a little bit about in the previous slide was that we never had a comprehensive centralized repository for historical data, and that was in a common space for us to use as part of our estimating process. So we had all kinds of data. It was just not stored or not collected in a way that we could use it for our benefits within our process. So those were the 4 key things that we pegged as part of our problem statement as we mapped out our road to success. Next slide, Natalia. So really the purpose of our plan was that we wanted to set the future state vision to develop an experienced, high-profile, high-performing estimating team that will provide high-quality project estimates based on established practices within agreed-upon service times and using a fully defined Bruce Power policies, process, and procedures. Wordy slide, but really what this means is that we knew that back when we kicked this off in 2015, that as we got to 2019 and 2020, we were going to be full-fledged into refurbishments. We were on the cusp of doing a lot of planning, and we needed to understand what our costs were going to be. And we knew that if we didn't fix this problem, that it was going to be an issue for us moving forward. And it had everything to do with finding resources, so establishing that high-performance team and making sure that they were armed with an industry best practice standard that aligned to those policies and those processes that we have within our business. So that was the purpose of what we had to, that we went with when we pulled this all together. Natalia. So we keyed in on six areas. So touched on a little bit, but we talked about our estimating process review. So what that was all about, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So procedural review and enhancements. And what we learned here was that we had some solid estimating procedures, but they were, I'll call them a little bit cumbersome, and they were a little bit overkill for what we wanted to do, and they didn't really line up with an industry best practice standard. So we wanted to look at that as part of our process. Once we understood what our review was, reviewed our processes, and understood what our procedures were going to be, we get into our estimating tools, which we ended up with a Cleopatra tool. We developed what we called our consolidated estimating plan, and based on this, we set ourselves out a plan for how we were going to succeed with major milestones and checkpoints along the way to make sure that we were on our road to success. We took a real hard look at our capacity, as we knew that we had a significant amount of work. The last piece here was capability and training. And this was probably, I'm going to say, our most challenging part, and what we still, I'm not going to say struggle with today, but continue to improve today. And it's not necessarily the capability within the team. It's having other folks within our integrated project teams understand our process and really what we're trying to do within our estimating process. It's educating our executives and our management teams as what the data is telling them. And that's always going to be a continuing struggle, but something that we do have some success stories that we can share with that as well. But it's something that continues to be a focus area for us. Next slide. So how are we going to measure success with our plan? How did we know that we had achieved? And the first bullet here is that we go through an investment management process. And what this meant was that when we got to critical decisions within our project performance, were we still getting past those phase case reviews, and were we actually producing estimates that were in accordance to the standards? So we track metrics on those sorts of things, and we're able to use that as a measuring stick. So the second one here is pretty straightforward. So project performance is reflected to align with the project estimate. So after we did the estimate, were we able to deliver the project for our estimated cost? Third bullet here, project estimates reviewed by the relevant stakeholders and sponsors. And this one here, I don't want to speak to other folks in the presentation, but really we wanted to make sure that we had everyone's buy-in on the project estimate. It wasn't just the estimator's estimate. It was a team that were pulling together that estimate. So that's really what that was. And we wanted to make sure that we had the engagement to get the right inputs to come up with the best quality estimate we could. Again, processes updated and rolled out to all of our stakeholders so they understood what we had planned to do. And then we wanted to assure that we had a procedure that aligned to the industry best practice standard. And I can say that I feel that with the help that we've gotten from the industry and from AACE and other benchmarking, we've been able to do that. But those are 5 of the measuring pieces that we wanted to go through as part of our plan. Natalia. All right. So you've heard lots from me. So I'm going to pass it off to Shoshana to pick it up from here.
Thanks, Scott. So as Scott mentioned, Bruce Power employed AACE recommended practices in their governance structure, and that's what they referenced. But the organization hadn't really caught up with those best intentions yet, but they are very much a plan, do, check, act organization. And so they understood that we are expecting to conform and adhere to the recommendations and guidance provided in these recommended practices, but how do we actually implement and execute those within the framework of our organization, hence the estimating improvement plan. And of course, as we know in AACE recommended practices, we also have plan, do, check, act. So they put in place this plan with objectives and performance success criteria, and then they engaged me and my organization to help them understand exactly how well they were doing along that road and where they truly needed to improve what they were doing and how they were doing and how they were communicating the requirements to do what needed to be done, both to those who were performing the estimates and those who were receiving them as estimate stakeholders. And because they understood that they needed to raise the bar in terms of their actual processes and procedures and tools, but they didn't know exactly where those elements in their current structure were failing them. And so enter the topic of the paper EST 275 and this extraction of the presentation that was provided back in 2017 or 2018 at the AACE annual conference regarding what we saw and where we saw improvement and what needed to be improved. Natalia, if you could flip to the next slide. Right, so a little bit about the project sample. We looked at 33 project level projects and 2 program level reviews. The programs were the actual scope bundles of all of the work within the major component refurbishment programs. So the projects within the sample were managed by 2 separate delivery organizations within Bruce Power. The costs associated with these projects ranged from less than $1 million Canadian to greater than $750 million Canadian for the projects. For the programs, obviously, we're talking, at the billion mark, again, Canadian. And the project delivery gate stages associated with the estimates ranged as well between initiation and execution preparation. And of course, every organization implements the phased gate project lifecycle process a little differently. So on the next slide, you'll see the representation of what that is in Bruce Power space. So they start off with a project initiation document. And that lets them into the initiation phase where they're basically developing the project maturity for a Class 5 estimate, and that progresses through to development, definition, and preparation. And it's when they get to the end of definition where they're producing a Class 3 estimate that they're really starting to engage with the vendors for quotes, etc., to go into the preparation phase and actually put those contracts into place so that they can execute with a Class 2 estimate. So that's the general overview, and the way that the organization presented their cost information was they would prepare an overall classification for the complete project scope, but then they would do an extraction of the forecasted costs for the next phase of project lifecycle. And there were some issues with respect to lexicon because this would be called a Class 2 estimate, regardless of what the characterization was for the actual end use of the estimate. So even at the initiation phase, the organization was producing a Class 5 estimate, they would call the forecast for the development phase costs a Class 2 estimate. So grounding what they were doing back into AACE recommended practices in 10S90 lexicon really helped the estimating organization communicate what they needed to do with respect to improving their processes and their interfaces with the other organization processes. Could we flip to the next, please? So we had a number of quantitative and qualitative assessment criteria that we used to sort of dig into all of these projects. And we were following the review, validate, and document estimating recommended practices. The organization itself said that they were going to build their estimates in accordance with 18R97, and they were going to produce basis of estimate documents in accordance to 34 R05. So when we were looking at them, we were making sure that, yes, indeed, their governance did specify the guidance in those RPs correctly. And what's more, the actual outputs of the organization conformed to the expectations in those RPs as well. And so these are just some, some of the elements that we were looking at. Had they characterized the estimates correctly? Did they have the right level of maturity in the first place? Were they using the right methodologies? Had they quantified and qualified their risk and contingency appropriately? Were the technical aspects of scope and the development of the estimate correct? And did they actually use their tools correctly? As Scott said, at the time that we did this review, they were still estimating in Excel. And as a result of a number of the, I want to say, quirks and areas for improvement that we saw in the products of the project files, that supported the strategic decision making to move from Excel-based estimating to database estimating. And then, of course, they went into the decisions of database selection, which, of course, Daryl and Natalia will talk about later. So these are the general elements. If you could switch to the next slide, please. And some more. So was it the latest template? The Excel database, the Excel template was constantly being updated at the project controls organizational level for things like rates and various code of accounts and WBS structures. But unfortunately, what we found was there was no single repository from which the estimator could pull that latest template. And so what you found was the estimators had their own little historical databases within their, C drives that they were sort of pulling on. And so you found inconsistencies in what was actually being used as the tool. And of course, again, because the estimators were using their own things, you found that in some instances they would tweak the file here or there with a hard-coded value that would overwrite formulas. And so we went in and did a real scrub, in terms of, were the formulas correct? Were they there? Was the math that was being used to develop the labor, material, indirects, overheads correct, valid, up to date? Were these costs and hours supported by a well-constructed, high-quality schedule commensurate with the level of definition? Were all of the line items in the estimate traceable back to project scope? Were they clearly supported and described by procurement, contracting, and execution strategies? And importantly, the assumptions, exclusions, limitations, and scope boundaries supporting the cost that was being presented, were those documented correctly, and were they documented in a single spot? So those were the questions that were generally guiding our review. If we move on to the next slide, Natalia, we'll sort of talk about what we found. So you can kind of get a sense that based on what we were seeing, there was an underlying paradigm in the organization that the number that had been set at class 5 was the budget for the project. And so whenever there were nuances that were changing in scope, understanding, affecting the cost, that translated into poor estimating or scope creep or cost increases. And so we needed to right size expectations. And that was helpful once we correlated the recommended practices to what was happening and used some consistent practices and guidance. There was also detailed direction missing to the estimator on how to perform their tasks. Yes, there was high level governance that referenced recommended practices, but the actual detailed instruction of how to perform their job wasn't there. There was a handbook that had been written based on the cost estimating improvement plan, but it hadn't actually been issued officially to the organization. And the organization was in flux, getting themselves up to speed with respect to the capacity of their estimating organization. So they were bringing in new estimators to help support the estimating processes, and the level of skill and knowledge of those resources varied widely across the board. So we had we essentially had issues where the way they were capturing the estimates in this Excel-based tool was inconsistent and didn't completely capture all of the details of assumptions, exclusions, scope basis. So from the perspective of creating a historical database from which to really improve their estimating processes, both in terms of the quality of the estimating product and the efficiency of the estimating organization, we didn't see anything there. So those were some of the inconsistencies we saw at the project controls and corporate level. If we flip to the next slide. In the estimates, the historical data that was being used sometimes was not properly conditioned for the current project that they were using. And of course, it was hard to understand if it was conditioned properly because it wasn't properly documented as such. And the definition of costs within the breakdown summaries were inconsistent. It was really left up to the estimator as to how they were going to slot the costs into the cost breakdown summaries and WBS. And so you had disconnects between the cost estimate and the schedule and the cost reporting tool. The method of quantification oftentimes wasn't apparent or didn't change based on the level of maturity. And the assessment and application of risk was sometimes indeterminate as a result of this. Oftentimes it would just be a single line item rather than an ability for us to really understand, this aspect of the estimate is what we have the most concerns about with respect to risk. And the basis of our cost development and documentation were disconnected. So these were some of the areas where we said, based on your objectives in the cost estimating improvement plan, you can get some easy wins to achieve those objectives if we improve these areas. And so the recommendations that followed in the next slide, Natalia, to specifically to management, we said provide consistent estimating direction that's detailed well enough to the whole organization so that both the estimators and the interfacing organizations understand what's going on and how it gets done. Enforce quality management processes in the cost estimating process so that we make sure that we really are producing the right classification of estimate with the right level of documentation for the end use, because again, that we're informing decision making at a management level for strategic planning. So we want to give them the right information to make that decision, and make sure that we align our vendor estimating inputs into our cost codes and work breakdown structures so that when we're getting vendor quotes, they line up to where we expect the costs to fit in, and provide a single consistent template for estimating across all of the delivery organizations so that at the capital portfolio level, you can roll everything up and really see where your costs are and how your projects are performing against baselines and expectations, so that you can do that continuous improvement process on estimating in future. And then provide a single repository for all of your estimating input and direction and report formats. Provide a central repository for the collection and analysis of historical data, so that we can do some real benchmarking on our projects and make sure that we have our plan, do, check, act. So those were the recommendations that were sort of summarized based on the individual areas for improvement we found. If we wanted to flip to the next slide, conclusions. We really have, three prevailing issues affecting the success of cost estimates, and they affect directly the quality, the accuracy, and that's the estimator's direct activity to perform that work. Do they have the skill and expertise? The estimating organization's direction to the estimator, that's their governance, their tools, their instructions, and then the overall understanding of the organization of the purpose and point of an estimate and what it's going to be doing, so that we're managing the culture and expectations around estimates and estimating. And then I'm going to turn it over to Daryl. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Shoshana. Next slide, please, Talia. All right, so objects to achieve. So summarizing what Shoshana just went through. So we really wanted a standard estimating template with a standard workflow. We wanted that localized estimate database and warehouse where all our estimates are stored. We want the ability to create our own knowledge base, and we wanted proper and standard estimating reports and do proper analysis. So proper analysis meaning benchmarking and estimate comparisons as we go through the gates. Next slide, please. Okay, so the hunt. So as you've heard, this decision was part of an enterprise-wide improvement program. The search for the right solution took about 2 years. So we started in 2016, evaluated 4 different tools, some more than once. We had a very stringent criteria of the requirements that we needed for the business. And then eventually we implemented Cleopatra Q4 of 2017. We did have a very, very rigorous training process to do. And now we use Cleopatra within our projects and engineering departments.
So hey guys, so I'll take it from here. So my job here is to, well, talk about the tool itself, because again, to help Bruce Power fulfill all of their requirements that they found and those recommendations that Shoshana mentioned and Daryl, of course, the tool has to have the capabilities to do what it needs to do. So just as a summary, so I just have some slides to show you what exactly is Cleopatra and what specifically was used, what features were used in the tool in this case study. So I like to show this slide again, just to kind of give everyone an idea what is Cleopatra as a whole. So Cleopatra Enterprise itself is a SaaS solution, software as a service. It can be hosted on the cloud, so everyone will get every user has their own license. And the way that it's built up is built up of these modules that you see here. So as an enterprise tool, so if all the modules were to be activated, it can and has the ability to support the project in its entire life cycle. So from your initiation, execution, and forward. So we have separate modules that can also be a standalone solution. So of course we have the estimating module, which in this scenario is what is the solution that Bruce Power selected to solve all their estimates and to fulfill those recommendations. We do have, of course, Cleopatra does have the ability to integrate with other tools, other ERP systems, other scheduling tools like Primavera P6, Microsoft Projects, engineering tools, Excel. We are very agnostic on who we integrate with, even other project controls tools if needed. We do have a cost management as well. This is now when you're executing the project. Now you can go forward and forecast, measure your actual progress or value and those types of things, even change management. And then we have finally the benchmarking module. So we do have a benchmarking feature within the estimating side of things. But of course, Cleopatra is its own database system. It's a SQL Server database. So you have the ability to house all of your projects in there, whether they be estimated, complete, and so forth. So within benchmarking, the user has the ability to select what parts of a project that they wish and how they want to compare. Regression, they can filter on different equipment items or materials and prices, index those items and so forth. So it kind of closes the loop on everything. And one thing to mention about who we are as a company is that not only, of course, we have this tool, but implementation is just as important. I'm very passionate when it comes to, when we're dealing with tools, because it's also the support behind it. And we pride ourselves that we are ourselves a consultancy. So when it comes time for integration, the training, how are we going to fit this tool and make it work for your processes? Because again, that's a big highlight. And that's something that I applaud Bruce Power, is that they took the time to, okay, what is the process that we need to do, and then find a tool that works. So we help and we sit down, we have cost engineers who have experience sit down with the client and then analyze those processes and make sure that it fits those needs. So in our case, they chose the cost estimation module, and this is just to highlight overall what it is, and some of the high-level functionalities. So we do have the ability to estimate the different class estimates. We can have our conceptual and parametric estimates based on cost models, for example. You can go all the way into your detailed estimates, so price per equipment. So if you have a list of material takeoffs, you can also import that via Excel and then manage that in the tool as well. We have the ability to have those assembly structures within your estimates, the buildup of those costs. So your total installation costs, your labor hours, rental, whatever you need. We do have the ability to look into not only materials, but of course your resources and your staffing estimates. So again, we do utilize, we have our own built-in scheduling, but what we typically do is integrate with Microsoft Project or Primavera P6, so we can work with those schedules and of course do these types of staffing schedules. We do have the ability to have multiple and manage different revisions, and I'll talk a little bit more on the workflow part of things. And finally, what I have here is a what if cost analysis. So let's say, so you have your estimate, but just to say something, the price of steel, you think it's gonna go up in price. How is that going to affect my estimate? So you can create separate scenarios, whether it be location or, the price of steel, and then you can see how those estimates will look like in those types of scenarios. Two more slides here is, so they talked about, again, reporting and standardization. How are we going to classify how we build up our structures and our estimates? So of course, one of our main features is that you have the ability to create as many breakdown structures as you need to, and use those to either compare different metrics together, or of course your reporting. So this is the foundation of what makes everything tied together within the system. Daryl, do you have anything to add about that? I know you really like this slide.
Sure. So I admit I'm a huge fan of this breakdown structure feature. It's a lot of fun because you can really put any sort of breakdown structure you want in your estimates. So these breakdown structures is what you use to break down the details. You can do very, very granular review. So just think, obviously we have our standard breakdown structures like that's shown on the slide. So our CVS or WBS, we've got resource structures, we have a lot of, say, valve projects where you can even tag all those valves to a structure so you can see exactly the details of every valve replacement. You can have a lot of fun with these, and it's a really strong feature of Cleopatra.
It's nice to hear that it's very fun, you know, that you kind of need a little fun when you're working, huh, in estimates.
Yeah, when we
so
first
this, go ahead.
when we first implemented Cleopatra, it was almost a game, right? How to break down the work, just to one up the other estimator that I've got this granular detail versus you. So they're a lot of fun for everyone.
Thanks for that, Daryl. So this other feature is something that I feel a lot of other tools lack, but it's very important because, okay, you can build an estimate. So now what? So we have this project analytics feature where now that you have all your numbers put in, your indirect costs, markups, whatever it may be, now let's do our estimates, especially when you're working with different revisions. So you have the ability to, again, not only see your scheduling and how that's going to look, but here you can basically work simultaneously with multiple disciplines on a single project. You can compare different revisions together. So you, from one project, you have your class 3, 4, 5, and you can actually put them together in a waterfall chart as an example, and then you can see what were those increases or decreases and compare those things. So this is where the estimating benchmarking comes into play here. Daryl, you want to add something before I go to the next slide?
No, I fully agree with everything you said. So how we use the project analytics is to compare estimates. So your class 5 to your class 4 to your 3 to 2. And you can do that by any breakdown structure. So not only can you view different things by breakdown structure, but you can compare against and report on. So if you wanted to see a variance, say at a WBS level, or break it down to a control account level, you have the ability to do that. So you can get either as high level as you want or as granular as you want. What we're looking at using analytics for now is we've actually got a standard vendor template that we can load into our estimating program that allows for vendor comparisons to our internal estimates by, again, our standard coding.
Awesome. So yeah, to do bidding, owners also look to this to do bidding type of analysis and stuff. So these slides that you're going to see, I think there's 3 more, if I remember correctly. So these are just kind of highlighting, going back to Daryl's slide, you know, what they were looking for. And I just kind of put some screenshots so you can see what that looks like. So one of the points that Daryl made is that they were looking for standard templates. You know, you're working on the same types of projects. You don't want to recreate the formulas, you don't want to recreate the disciplines or breakdown structures. So Cleopatra has the ability to store those templates. So this is just an example. When you create a brand new estimate or document, you have that option to go down and pull the template that you need and just get started off from there.
Yeah, so exactly that. So some of the recommendations that Shoshana and her team provided was that everyone needs to use a single template for estimating across the organization. So we've done that, and now we're aligning all our estimate inputs with our corporate cost code. So like you said, we've got all our standard structures embedded into the template. So having a standard template allows us to putting our standard deliverables that the estimators estimate to already pre-coded with all our standard coding. So there's no one-off interpretations of what something should be coded to. It's already done for the estimators. And then also embedded in our template would be our standard overheads, our standard allowances, our current factor tables, rate lists, all that stuff that the estimator shouldn't have to worry about necessarily. And then also the standard templates. So you can populate these standard templates with a bunch of metadata. So classifications is what they're called in the tool, which for us, I use these a lot. So every estimator fills in like what their system code is, what component the estimate is for. You can have custom fields such as our document, our review document. So the review documents and data is all embedded right into our estimate. This allows us to, so if we wanted to do reports and analytics on, say, estimates of X system, you can pull that up quite easily.
Right.
So
And yeah,
overall, it really gives the estimator a solid foundation and a consistent approach to start from. So it definitely stops those one-off custom templates that Excel people were doing in Excel.
I like what Shoshana said, that like at the beginning they didn't see that the estimators had a direction, and this is a way of providing them with that direction. So I like to see it that way. This next slide that you see here is our workflow. So going back to what was mentioned before, that, you know, to make sure that there was a standard flow, who needed to work on the estimate, when did it needed to get approved, all of that, we have the ability to create this workflow. And this not only shows you what the next step or what stage the document is in, but also this is where you can provide certain rights at certain stages or events within the workflow. So you can create like read-only rights, or this person has the ability to approve at this stage. So no, for example, if you're not in approval stage, for example, you're still in phase 2, you do not have the ability to just approve it at that stage. It has to go through this process first. So how do you guys use it, Daryl?
Yeah, so what we've done to make sure the estimators follow the process is we've actually taken the process map out of our estimating procedure and used it for the basis of our workflow. So this makes sure that the estimators follow the proper process every time they build an estimate. And like you said, at certain stages, only certain people have certain rights. So like, for example, no one can move an estimate into an approved stage without my manager or myself moving it there. So it makes sure that nothing in the process is skipped, right? So we know that everyone's following the process. Also, if for anyone that is involved in nuclear projects, obviously there's specific security rights that only some people have, and we are allowed to, we make sure that only certain people are allowed to work on those types of security sensitive projects. So if I'm working on a security sensitive project, I can make sure that no one else has access to it except for the people that I know have the right settings and security approval.
This one is my personal favorites, and to me is the foundation of your estimate. But Cleopatra has the ability to store your information. So going back to the topic of database. So let's say you have a list of all of your items, whether it be equipment, BOQ rates, those types of things, pricing. We can help you put that in a structural format and into Cleopatra. We can teach you how to do that without our support even. But it's a feature, part of the estimating, where again, you can plug that in, create your own pricing and structure. So what you see here, you would basically have your database, or as we call knowledge base, and then you can break them down at different levels. So that's kind of going into your assembly structure. Then it will go into this, if you see here in the middle, this is like a filtering type of structure. So I'm looking for a process of this basis of design. And then again, it will filter through all of your information, and then you can have that information in that library. So when you're ready and you find what you're looking for, all that information, would be the pricing or even a formula, can be stored in here. So all you need to do is click and drag that into your estimate, and then that's where you can start working from. So in a way, it's your database library. So we helped, and Daryl can speak more on this, but we were able to help Bruce Power build that knowledge base, especially within the nuclear power for them.
Yeah, because as most of you may know, there really isn't a good knowledge base for refurbishment type work, let alone nuclear refurbishment work. So as Scott mentioned before, we're going through all this refurbishment stuff for the next 30 years. Now is I call it a once in a lifetime opportunity to capture these costs and build our knowledge base. So we're definitely using this function, and what this allows us to do is allows us to build up the activities to create not only like standard fragments for the estimator to start from, but it really just gives a good basis to our estimates going forward. It also does allow for other industry knowledge bases. So like we use paginations, for example, and obviously like Richardson's and any of those other knowledge bases, you're able to put into the tool. So it really does support and build a solid foundation for our estimates.
And something to mention too, you can even already have these individual items or equipment or assemblies link up or link up to your corresponding breakdown structure. So when you're pulling this into your estimate, it already knows where to go and how to report itself. Of course, you have the ability to change that before you do so, but it's you can have that automated. And finally, standard reports. Of course, we have within the estimating module, we have like these dashboards that go into these different tabs. You can see your grand total, your rate totals, and even your breakdown total. So this is where you can report on, like we mentioned before, on different breakdown structures. And you can even have what we call this is like a pivot table, but we call it a breakdown cube, where you can compare one structure against another. So in this example, your elbow against its size, and then you can see what those totals are. So that's just what's standard, of course. Those, I call them dashboards, but you can also custom make your own report. So as you see here with the Bruce Power logo, you have a reporting wizard that it will take you through, and you can save those layouts, and then you can essentially make your estimators always pick the same report, and all it does is capture the live data that is in the tool right now and report on that. So you can have your grand total at the end. You could even include pictures, pie graphs, and so yeah, that's just some examples of some of the reports. Want to add to that, Daryl?
Yeah, like really for this one, it's everyone's using the same reports. The teams are seeing the same data. It prevents one-off reports or wasted time building reports that are now automated. So really, we've got a standard cover page. We've got standard variance reports that aligns with governance expectations. So really just takes the time away from the estimators building standard reports, and everyone's seeing the same thing. And yeah.
So yeah, actually the estimators get to spend time estimating and not building.
That's right. There's lots of estimates.
All right, Brooke.
Thanks. So lastly, we'll talk about the results of these improvements. So next slide, please. So we found a number of benefits moving from Excel estimating to using the Cleopatra software. We now have the ability of sending our estimates from Clio to our scheduling software P6. This has reduced the risk of human error when loading estimates to the schedules. And we've also found that both the estimate and the schedule have become more aligned because of it. We have also determined it takes the schedulers significantly less time to load an estimate than when they had to load it manually. We're able to create a company-specific knowledge base, as we talked about before, that allows us to standardize specific tasks and costs by benchmarking and using information provided by some of our other project controls tools as well. We can create and take advantage of some of the different metric check tools during estimate reviews to find any unwanted errors or structures that were missed. This kind of removes the concern of not filling out an item that may be important when running those standardized reports or completing any comparisons, because these reports provide significant support for our project teams across site. Cleopatra provides us with the opportunity to create a project analytic for our estimates, which allows us to properly complete reconciliations and comparisons against our previously estimated or our previously completed estimates, and easily shows you the delta between them. And it also allows for cross-PDO collaboration, which provides our project teams with the information they need in a way that makes sense for everyone. Next slide, please. So some of the overall improvements that we've seen over the last 3 years of using Cleopatra are that we've been able to produce a higher quality and a larger volume of estimates in a shorter period of time, and have the ability to see that information in many different ways. It has made it easier to find any errors or oversights that may have been missed if we were still estimating in Excel. As we discussed before, we have the ability to transfer estimates to our scheduling team, which has reduced the time it takes to load an estimate. Cleopatra has streamlined the overall estimating process for us, and our department has been able to work more collaboratively with our project teams and produce better quality estimates. And lastly, Daryl likes the breakdown structures, but we've been able to create project-specific breakdown structures that have allowed our users to standardize and improve the overall organization of their estimates, which makes it easier to sort and compare data between multiple estimates. So I think that brings us to the end of our presentation. Do any of the presenters have anything else they'd like to say?
Hey, Brooke, it's Scott here. I was just going to say that at the beginning of the presentation, I don't think I introduced myself. So I'm Scott Morrison. I'm a senior program manager with Bruce Power, and I'm responsible for the estimating and the risk function. So where my story started here was actually I was the one who was responsible for helping put together our original plan, and then worked our way through that, and then handed it off to Daryl to really do the implementation of the tool. So just so that you have a little background as to who I am as well. So thanks for that, Brooke.
All right, this is Jill. We have a few questions in the chat. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, put them in the chat, or if you want to ask them live, I suggest putting in the chat like, hey, I want to ask my question, and we'll call on you just because there's so many people in here. But the first question is, has this really reduced cost and time impacts?
So I'll take that one. The answer is no. It hasn't really reduced the cost of nuclear projects. What it's done is improved the confidence in the estimates that are produced for nuclear projects. The cost of licensing and quality in nuclear is what it is. A nuclear class valve will always cost what a nuclear class valve will cost. But now we're able to interrogate the estimates and truly understand that we've captured the costs for all of the required scope, and that we've captured those costs correctly and with minimization of errors and uncertainties, because we can interrogate the estimates at a much better, more granular level. So in that sense, we've increased cost and schedule assurance. How's that for an answer?
Well, thank you, Shoshana, and I have a question. How has this impacted the cost and time of the estimating process itself within your organization?
Sure, I can take that. So really what it's allowed us to do is become more efficient as a team. So not so much worried about the coding structures, but to estimate the work. And as we continue on our benchmarking journey, our estimates are only going to become more faster, especially at a class 5 level.
Thank you.
Yeah, this Chaudhry Gandhi, really good presentation. Appreciate all the input and knowledge gained from this. Quick question, basically to anybody to answer. How has this process / approach / methodology helped with addressing risk?
Do you want me to take a run at that one?
I think you should.
It's a good question, and it's timely too. So as part of our estimating process, what we found is that as part of, I don't want to call it siloing, but as part of the not having all of our estimators aligned, we were finding a lot of cases in which things that were perceived as potentially that could be risks were being baked into the base cost of the estimates. and vice versa. Sometimes we would see stuff that it technically could be a base cost and it would be excluded from the estimates. So by really streamlining our process, we were able to really understand what would be base cost versus what would be a risk. And where we've drawn the line is at that 80%. So if a risk has a 80% probability that it's going to be incurred, then we typically include that in the base cost of the estimate. And the other thing that we've done too is that as part of our risk process, we have dedicated risk specialists that we assign to each of the project teams within the business. And what they really do is that they help to drive and they help to really prompt the project teams to help drive out those risks. And one of the things that we talked about as part of our process was getting the engagement of the rest of the integrated project teams by having really good kickoff meetings, really good turnover or really good review sessions. We're able to drive some of those things out and get them either put into the ARM database or get them put into the estimate. And why I say your question is timely is that on our next piece of roadmap for success is that we're in the point now that I'm not going to say we're getting into repeat work, but because we have 8 units, we do have a lot of repeat work. So we'll do unit 5. Oh, we have the next project coming in unit 6. So we're looking for opportunities. So what could we do better? What worked well? What didn't work well? And we're going to use our risk process to help drive those opportunities. So those are things that we want to understand so that we can help to drive down those costs now that we really understand our data. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I would go ahead and add to that, Shoshana.
Well, I was going to say, I would also argue from the perspective of the independent reviewer that I think the organization has reduced some of the systemic risks that come along with having a unified structure and format for the estimate development and reporting and communication, so that the level of confidence in the presentation of the estimate has improved, and the ability to communicate with stakeholders and interface organizations has improved. So the risk associated with those elements has certainly gone down in the organization.
Right, really good. Thank you very much.
All right, next question is, how much effort was put into the training of Cleopatra?
Sure. So during implementation, Cleopatra actually has a bunch of online training modules that you could take before you inherit the program. So we did about 2 weeks of training just online. And then we went through the implementation and actually had a week of in-class sessions to kind of show the estimators around the tool, how we made Cleopatra more specific for Bruce Power. And then after that, it was really, we created a sandbox within the tool and had everyone try out a couple things, get comfortable within the tool. There was a lot of one-on-one training. We had sessions every week for tips and tricks and opportunities to become a little more efficient in some of the functions. And then really the estimators just started learning on their own and learning off each other. So challenging each other on how to find more efficient ways or shortcuts. It was a bit hard to get some of the, I guess, more senior people to buy into an estimating tool. They were so used to using Excel, but once they got into the tool, they all saw the improvements and enhancements, and it was actually fun to see each other. It was fun to see the estimators start challenging themselves at that point. So it took a while. It probably took a good 4 or 5 months for everyone to feel comfortable switching from Excel to Cleopatra, but now we've got full buy-in from everyone.
Nice. Next question. Were the estimates estimated in US dollars and then converted to Canadian dollars, or were they estimated in Canadian dollars to begin with and thus no conversion?
Yeah, sure. So all of our rates are Canadian dollars. All of our estimates are Canadian dollars. But the one function that Cleopatra has is it actually has a currency rate list. So for example, every quarter I go in and update the conversion rate for US to Canadian dollars. So when we do get an American quote for a component of some sort, we could put the dollars in as American, so you can see that it lines up with the vendor quote, but it will actually do that conversion to Canadian dollars.
What were the vendor requirements for the estimating tool?
Cheaper, Scott. I'm not sure if you can remember that. That's quite a while ago now.
Maybe just to be a little bit more specific. So are you talking about when the vendor requirements when we went out for RFP to get a tool, or vendor requirements for when we build estimates?
Jim, do you want to unmute yourself, Jim Johnson, and add the details to your question?
No, it was the RFP requirements. Did you have something specific that drove you towards Cleopatra's and away from the other vendors that you selected?
For sure, Jim. Yeah, the key pieces to us was that on site, our work management, operations, and project teams all used Primavera P6. So that was one of the key requirements, is that we wanted to have that automation to push estimates to P6, but we also wanted to have the requirement to have that interface to be bi-directional. And that's one of the things that Daryl's working on right now, so that we can actually have project teams building up schedules, and then we can push those deliverables back across into our estimates and update estimates as we go along the way. So that was one of the key requirements. And now we're going back about 6 years. So I'm gonna see if I can remember some of the other ones, but the multiple breakdown structures that Daryl's so passionate about, that was another key piece for us. Only because the way in which our business runs is that we need to have different views of different things. So that was a key piece of it. We wanted to be on the cloud. So we wanted to have that ability. So that was one of the requirements that we had. The piece that we talked about with the templates, we needed to ensure that we had standard templates. We needed to make sure that we could have the ability to build our own database. We wanted to build our own Bruce Power nuclear standards database. So that was one of the requirements. One of the requirements that we had that we didn't have when we got Cleopatra, but it's available now in one of the latest releases, is we wanted to have the ability to have multiple estimators in the same estimate. So we have a lot of estimates in which we have a mechanical component and electrical component. We have both electrical and mechanical estimators, so they can go in there and do each of their pieces to gain some efficiencies. We had some requirements around reporting, and I think that was really the key. Oh, we did have a requirement for the workflow piece. That was one where that was for me as at the time I was doing Daryl's job as the estimating manager, and now I've moved on to a different role. But for me, it was key for me to be able to go in and see where we were at with in our phases. So we actually have established what I would call rules of credit for where we are with our estimates. And I can log in every morning, and not that I don't want to talk to people, but I can see exactly where we are in the process with each of our estimates. And that allows me to help manage our stakeholders. So that was a key piece for us. And I find that to be I typed it in the chat. I said it was my favorite part of the tool, because that really helps us manage our work and gives us a really good understanding of where we are. And it really helps us with our checkpoints. So those were all really important things to line up with what our requirements were. So did I miss anything, Daryl?
No, I think just over, like, a lot of the tools like that were great for a contractor, but for an owner type business, Cleopatra, with the capabilities of doing project analytics and building their own knowledge base and the stuff you just talked about, was really what led us to choose Cleopatra.
Okay, you guys have kind of touched on this, but just in case you have something to add, did you create your own knowledge or database, or did you start with a commercial data set?
Yeah, so it depends on the type of project. So like a piping estimate, we will definitely utilize paginations and and some of those piping standards. However, we do have our company specific factors that we add on to that. So for those types of estimates, we definitely utilized outside industry norms. But for stuff like refurbishing a nuclear reactor, there's no knowledge base for that. So it's a mix right now.
Okay, next question is schedulers and estimators often work in silos. How did you get the organization to use common breakdown structures across the estimate, schedule, cost tools?
I can take that one. So in parallel to the cost estimating improvement plan that Scott had mentioned, the whole project controls organization was in the process of an improvement plan. And part of that improvement plan was a unified code of accounts and WBS structure that should be used for all of their enterprise management software. So EcoSys would have the same coding as P6, is the same coding as whatever the tool ended up being for estimating ultimately Cleopatra. And so they ensured that each of those enterprise tools had columns specifically for that coding, which would allow the organization to tie to for those pushes between various software.
And to add to that, Shoshana, it definitely wasn't easy. We had to force the conversations in some cases. So making sure that the planners attended the kickoff meetings, asking for, say, a copy of their WBS that we could load into the tool. And we also have resources now that their job is to make sure that there's alignment between the tools. So we've got what we call business analysts that they work on these common structures and making sure the tools are aligned. So it's been a lot of work, but we're definitely collaborating now, and everyone understands the importance of having common structures with the same meaning throughout the tool.
All right, can you provide an example of how the system facilitates identifying and tracking the effect of changes?
Would you like me to tackle that one, Daryl?
It's all yours.
So in our
You muted yourself.
I just muted myself. Yes. So the way in which we track changes, we actually do that within EcoSys. So in our cost system, that's where our change logs are. So we have a very specific change process that we go through with PCR. So project change requests that go through a formal process, and we track our changes all through our cost function. And what that allows us, what we now have the ability to do is, Daryl talked a little bit about this at the beginning, and the last piece of our journey, and it ties in with our database piece of it and our knowledge base, is we're loading actual costs from EcoSys back into Cleopatra so that we can do benchmarking. So as part of that is we've standardized and landed on what our standard deliverables are, so we can go back to our actual costs, see if we have any changes that are against those deliverables, to see if there's any deltas between our estimates. So we track our changes and manage that process through our cost tool.
All right, next question. Do you seek outside cost estimating consultants to perform any estimate? And if you do they have to use the Cleopatra enterprise system? And how do you transfer outside information into your system?
Sure. So Brooke could probably talk to this one better than I can, but we have subbed out all our estimators to a third party, Williams Canada, who 100% has access to Cleopatra. So they're the estimators doing the estimates. Scott and myself oversee those estimators and the vendor.
All right, so you mentioned cost and EcoSys, time and P6, risk and opportunity for ARM. How can all that get integrated using unified codification that collects data for estimating using Cleopatra?
Good question. I'll take a run at it. So, and I'll get probably Daryl and Josh to help me out here. So when we talk about the first piece of our process is our estimate. And what we do is we have an integration between Cleopatra and P6. And then that integration gets us aligned between estimating and cost. The second piece of our suite of tools is we have an integration between P6 and EcoSys. So what we're able to do then is take all of the work inside of our schedules, line it up with what deliverables they follow, and then we're able to push that into the cost world, so that we have a estimate that comes up with a cost. We take that work in P6 and we time phase it, and we have built those, though I shouldn't say built, those interfaces have been designed to take over the appropriate metadata between the two systems to keep ourselves aligned. So once we time phase that in P6, we then push that over to EcoSys, and then we end up with a project budget. And we do this, if everything goes according to plan, we do this 5 times per project. So at each of our phase gate reviews, and then our projects get a new baseline every time they go through this process. So the last piece of that we're working on to keep ourselves aligned is we don't have a direct interface from EcoSys to Cleopatra as of yet, but what we do have is an export Excel flat file that we can take all the actual costs that are in the same structures that are from the estimate and from the schedule and from P6, and then we're able to upload those back into Cleopatra. So what we do is utilizing the I'm gonna screw up the module, Daryl, but utilizing our which module do we use for doing our comparisons?
Oh, we use our project analytics.
That's the one. It was on the tip of my tongue. We use the project analytics, where we can go back and we can compare any estimate to our actual costs, and then use that as our lessons learned. So by some integration between all of the systems, we're able to tie all those things together. The one system that is I'm not going to say it's out there, but it's not fully connected yet, is Active Risk Manager. And in ARM, we have an interface that goes from P6 to ARM, in that, so that we can do some time phasing on our risks. But we still have some work to do to bring ARM in to start to understand those opportunities and those risks. So that's on our roadmap
Right.
for the future.
Which, as I understand it, will all be integrated through the change management process. So you're not going to see it necessarily in Cleopatra. You're going to see it in EcoSys, and the actuals that come out of EcoSys after the change has been approved and incorporated into the baseline, as it goes back out as an actual to EcoSys at the end of the project.
Yeah, and then the other thing that we do too that kind of pulls a lot of this stuff together is that we've started to do some work with Power BI and Power Apps to start going into the details, to start building up portfolio reports, and we have a significant suite of those things to help tie a lot of this stuff together too.
Thank you. Are your cost estimates developed using a specific type of cost book database, i.e. RS means?
Yeah, so I think we kind of touched on this before. We do utilize some other types of cost book databases. So Paginations, Cleopatra actually comes with their own knowledge base, the CESC knowledge base. So we do utilize that from time to time. And then our own knowledge base are really the three major ones we have in the tool. And then we do, the estimators, some use like a Nika knowledge base. It's not in Cleopatra, but they do reference it as a guideline in some cases.
All right, next question is, could you please advise about the use of value engineering in construction of NPP in order to avoid cost overruns and delays? During the Bruce NPP, please advise whether you conducted any VE workshops.
Right, so I can answer that. That is an area for improvement and opportunity in nuclear, and Bruce Power is not alone in that with respect to the Canadian nuclear operators. They don't really utilize value engineering in the development of project scope to refine cost and schedule as much as they could and should.
All right, can it be integrated with P6 directly, or do we still need some extra effort to get output and load to P6 to update?
Yeah, so Natalia, I'm not sure if you want to take this one, but really during implementation, we did set up Cleopatra so it directly speaks to P6. All you got to do is map what fields you want to go over. So for us, you obviously want to map over your WBS, your activities, any other coding you want to transfer over. And it's really just a couple clicks of a button and it transfers to P6.
Yeah, and just to add, when talking about those types of integrations, so what we typically do is we sit with the client and then we look into, okay, what do you need to work within this integration? What do you need it to connect to? So then our programmers know exactly, how exactly to link those in. But as Daryl said, it's mostly based off of those breakdown structures. So yeah, based on that, and then we can build that link. We have API linkage. That's the IT term. So yeah, we make sure that those are clear. And then again, as mentioned before, we have that directional integration.
All right. Does the tool integrate with Power Platform tools for analytics, such as Power BI? You've kind of briefly touched on it, but.
So Cleopatra does have that ability. We utilize what we call web services. So we do have the ability to integrate and speak to Power BI and those tableaus and those types of tools using, well, what we call web services.
All right. The next question says, thank you for the presentation. Will you be sharing the slides with the participants? And Srini, you want to answer this? I know we'll be putting it on YouTube.
Yeah, we will share the entire YouTube link, entire meeting link as a channel to our channel. We'll send the link to all of our registrants.
All right. Thank you. The last question I have, but feel free to add more to the chat, is do your vendor contracts now require quotes and proposals to align with your breakdown cost categories?
The answer is yes, actually. Yes. They have they were not all jumping, so I'll talk for them.
They couldn't find my mute button.
Yeah, so they have created a standard contract schedule for project control. So it's not just their estimating template, it's also their schedule template that is required to conform to these requirements that goes out with every request for proposal so that the vendors can submit their bids in that format.
All right, does anyone else have any questions? If not, we got to thank you. Yeah, so, I mean, thank you. I really enjoyed the presentation. Srini, you want to wrap it up?
Thank you. Thank you, Scott, Shoshana, Darrell, Brooke, Natalia, for making this happen. Thank you so much. It's very good, and it's quite a lot of knowledge sharing from you. And I hope everyone will implement at their work with this knowledge and go from there. Thank you so much, and we look forward for more presentations from you guys.
And thank you, Srini. If you hadn't contacted me on LinkedIn that day, well, maybe this wouldn't have happened. So LinkedIn is the bomb, guys. All right.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.